They're dead, Dave.
What, Captain Hollister?
Everybody's dead, Dave.
What, Todd Hunter? What, Selby? Not Jen.
He's dead, Dave. Everybody is dead. Everybody is dead, Dave.
Hello everyone, welcome back to Everybody's Dead Dave, a Red Dwarf review podcast hosted by myself, Adam Martyn, and as always with my co-host...
Philip Hawkins, that is me.
That is him. And it's that time again, we are joined by a special guest to review an episode of Red Dwarf with us. We are joined by the lovely Sophie Iles. How are we doing, Sophie?
Hi everyone, hi, I'm good, thank you. How are you guys doing?
Not too bad. Ticking along, 30-odd episodes in, I think. I've lost count by this point individually.
Way more than that, because I've just released episode yesterday 33, I think.
Okay,
and we are about six episodes ahead of that recording, so...
Way more along.
And almost up to episode 40.
Oh, goodness me, episode 40. Well, I'm sure listeners who have listened to the show before know the premise. If you're new, hello. And the premise is, me and Phil normally do it, and Phil is a seasoned Red Dwarf viewer. He's been watching for, I won't say how long, because he'll tell me off for making him feel old. But he's seen the show.
You always make me feel old, Adam.
I'm sorry, Phil. I'm so sorry. But this is not Phil's first rodeo. For me, this is my first time through Red Dwarf. Every episode is my first time viewing. And Sophie is our guest. I mean, you know, we've had guests who are like Phil, they've seen it before. Guests like me who've never seen it. Some who maybe have seen a few episodes here and there. What's your story with Red Dwarf?
I knew of Red Dwarf because it does feel like a bit of a staple in terms of comedy. Like you would have heard the name somewhere, especially like because I'm a bit younger than Phil, but not too much younger than Phil. So it's the kind of, I think I would have been the right age to have watched it if I'd been into sci-fi as a kid. I think it'd been something I would have watched. But no, I'd heard of it, never watched it until today. So this is going to be an interesting review.
You never watched it to today, but you have, of course, drawn it before today.
I have drawn it before today.
This is something we haven't mentioned yet, but Sophie is, of course, the artist behind the lovely cartoons of both myself and Adam and the ships that adorn our artwork on our channel and on the intro. So if you've not seen the YouTube intro to this, if you've only listened to it on Apple Podcasts or whatever, go check out at least one of the episodes on YouTube, because we got a great intro which features Sophie's brilliant artwork and is compiled with some other footage mixed together by George Sheard, who's also been a guest on the podcast. So we're sort of two down on the people that helped us come up with our intro stuff. We've had you and George. We just need Stephen Kingsbury, who did the music now, and then we will have had all three people that helped us put together the intro.
Trifecta. Wonderful. Well, we should aim to do that in the future as well. But in the present, it's all about past, present, and future in this one, we're on Series 7, Episode 3, Ouroboros, I think, or Ouroboros, or however you want to say it. That's the episode.
I will certainly be saying it Ouroboros, because that sounds right in my head. So if I'm wrong, oh well, tell me later. But that's how I'm saying it. That is how Lister says it when he knows the name.
It is.
So I'm going to say Ouroboros, because it does sound... I'm going to go with that. But you can do what you want.
Yeah. But basically, listeners, Sophie and Phil will probably say it the correct way. I'll probably say variations of it an incorrect way. So
don't count on that. I will probably say it completely wrong. Ouroboros was how I read it, and then I heard it in the episode, and I was like, "That's not how I pronounced it. I've got it all wrong."
Different. But the synopsis of this episode is as follows: Lister, Cat, and Crichton stumble upon a tear in the fabric of space that leads to another dimension. There they meet parallel versions of themselves and Lister's old girlfriend, Christine Kotchanski. Dun dun dun! So that is the premise, and we kick things off. If this was your first episode, Sophie, I mean, you might not have realised, but I had noticed no title sequence. There usually is one.
No title sequence, so I was thrown straight
This was apparently because the episode overran, so they didn't have enough time on the broadcast episode for the title sequence. However, when they released it on VHS, they included it. So it's interesting that they haven't on... You're watching on Blu-ray, aren't you? I think.
Yes, yeah,
and I'm watching on BritBox.
I watched on BritBox.
Yeah, so it's interesting that they haven't kept it for that, but they've kept it as broadcast.
There you go. Handy facts, Phil. You always have a good handy fact for moments like this. But we kick things off not in space. We're in the Egbert Arms in Liverpool in the year 2155.
Now this is what I expect a future bar to look like. It's kind of slightly dystopian, but it looks like a future bar. Now in a previous, you won't know this, Sophie, but in the previous episode, way back in Series 3, I want to say, because Crichton was definitely there.
Yeah.
And in an episode called Time Slides, they go back in time to when Lister's a teenager and he's playing in a band at a pub. And the pub just looks like a 1970s, sort of 1980s pub in that. It's like they've clearly just gone into one of the BBC stock sets and gone, yeah, we'll borrow that. And they didn't have much budget. But this actually looks like a future bar. This is what I expect a bar or pub to look like in the future, not like it was the 1970s or 80s.
See, it's funny you say that because it kind of reminded me, like in the late 90s, early 2000s, when you go to like bowling alleys or places like that, it kind of reminded me, it's probably because I grew up in Doncaster, so it's not very salubrious, but it just kind of gave me that vibe, that sort of like a bit grungy, a few like coloured lights here and there. So
yeah,
it
all those
made
laser
me feel...
tag games where they would get out a whole like floor of a building in that kind of style, and you'd have to run around like shooting each other with these lasers.
Love that still. What did you think then, Sophie? Being as this is like the very first few minutes, were you thrown by, we're not like in space on a ship called Red Dwarf?
I didn't really know what to expect at all. I knew I was in the middle of a series as well, so I knew it was episode 3. So I was like, okay, this could be related to something I've not seen yet. So I just kind of like just kept with it. I think it's really hard to explain because I've come into it so fresh. I was like, I don't know who any of these characters are. Is the baby important? Who are we in Liverpool? Oh, we are in Liverpool. It makes sense. All the Scouse accents, very good. Okay, 2159 was it? Like, okay,
somewhere around there.
Trying to get my brain into where are we supposed to be? I quite liked the little gimmick of it having grav pool written on the pool table.
Yeah.
But you never see it obviously in action. But my brain's like, I want to know what gravity pool is like. Definitely want to know.
Yeah, they've mentioned it before, I think, but we've never seen it.
And I like the fact that you've got those like the bars in front of the bar, as it were. So like, yes, we keep everyone safe, almost like a bookies instead of it being a bar. And I was like, that makes sense. That's kind of a sci-fi thing, I would imagine, I'm assuming a kind of dystopian future, because I don't really know the rest of the series or how it's played out. So, interesting, I suppose.
Yeah, well, we haven't really seen much of Lister's original time period at all, other than that 1980s looking bar that we had before. So, there's never been any indication that it's necessarily just a dystopian world that he comes from. But it does look very dystopian here.
It looks a bit grimy or grungy.
Maybe that's just the writers commentating on Liverpool, in which case, hopefully people from Liverpool aren't too offended.
I'd be curious, if I still lived in Liverpool, I'd definitely ask, because if that is the case, I'd be like, but they're lovely, and it's a lovely city. Go to Liverpool, people, if you haven't been, it's lovely. But we're not there for very long, not in this episode. We flash forward to the present we've been following. We're back in space, and Lister, of course, is doing a very Lister thing, sorting his nose hairs out in the only way that Lister could.
Now, I related so much to this scene, I have to say. I mean, I have not used giant tongs, admittedly, but the pain on his face when he was plucking those nose hairs and the sneeze afterwards. I do have to say, I've been there. And I relate to that.
What were your impressions, Sophie? Again, I guess introduction to this character. Like, he's, what did you think about good old Craig Charles?
I considered him to be quite a vain character, that he cared that much about his appearance. But again, because I didn't know quite where he sat. Like, I knew he was one of the main characters, so I knew he. I didn't know how important he was in the crew, so whether his appearance mattered. Like, it's really weird what you think about when you're watching something for the first time with no information. I was like, okay, so he's obviously very vain, and I'm imagining kind of full of himself, but then is obviously getting older, which is why he's making all these comments about having to groom himself in that way, I suppose. Like, that's how I imagine it. And then obviously then with like Crichton coming in and being like I want to take care of all your clothes and things. I was like, oh, okay, so we've got C-3PO, and then we've got then we got one of our leads, okay, or our lead, I assume, is definitely the lead by the time we get to the end of that scene. So okay, makes sense now. Yeah, I love Crichton.
It's interesting that you picked up that he might be vain in this, because that I can absolutely see why you'd get that from this scene, but it's almost the complete opposite of what he is usually. Until he's not vain at all, in the sense that he's generally portrayed as quite a slob, and like he's the type of person that in one episode he's going out somewhere fancy and he realizes he's got holes in his trousers, in the back of his trousers. So instead of getting a new pair of trousers, he spray paints his bum cheek that could be seen black so that it just doesn't notice. So it's quite interesting that is from this, you picked up that he might be vain.
Yeah, that is interesting. Yeah. I mean, I guess obviously as we go on, there is a reason why I continue to think he was vain as well, for reasons that continue within this episode. But I think it's because of the premise of the episode, which again I think I'll get into when we get there. But I mean, I thought he was vain and quite funny. I did like the wood glue joke, in the sense of, oh my god, you're not gonna you're gonna floss. Oh, okay. Oh, you are gonna get it. Okay. It felt like very, as someone who watched a lot of Men Behaving Badly at that time and Only Fools and Horses, because I've not seen this sitcom before, I was like, oh, it's a space version of Men Behaving Badly. I kind of dig it. I almost, not quite, obviously, but that sense of a fun sci-fi sitcom, which I've never seen before, actually. So I found that really charming.
That's a good comparison, actually. I hadn't thought of that before, but now you think, especially like back when Rimmer was there, which we'll get into in a minute, but that kind of dynamic actually does feel a little bit like Men Behaving Badly in a way.
Was Men Behaving Badly that show? Was it that show that I've heard of it and I've seen a few clips? But was it quite thingy? Was it quite like not controversial? But was it quite raunchy in its day, if that makes sense, or like quite out there in its day?
I can't remember, because I was very young.
Maybe I'm thinking of a different show from the era.
I was quite young as well. It was Martyn Clunes and Neil. What's his last name? I've forgotten his last name. Neil somebody or other.
Yeah. I might be thinking of a different show from there's just one like 90s comedy that I've read was like very like out there, and people are like, oh goodness me, like very controversial, but maybe it's not Men Behaving Badly, maybe it's something else. Back to Red Dwarf though, one character who certainly is vain is the cat who comes swinging in. What are your thoughts on the cat, Sophie?
Well, I knew of the cat because of Danny
John Jules.
That's it. Obviously being on Strictly not long ago. Obviously he's a household name anyway. But he's the cat, and I was like, what? And then meeting him, I was like, is he a vampire? Genuinely, it's really hard to know if you don't know.
Don't worry, you're not the first person.
After I watched the episode, I obviously did some reading up on the characters, but I wanted to go in blind because I thought that'd be more entertaining. But I was like, why has this guy got fangs?
It's interesting. You're not the first person, as Adam just said. I think everybody that we've had on that has never seen a single episode of Red Dwarf before, their first thought with the cat is that's a vampire because of the fangs.
Because of the fangs, yeah. I mean, compared to when you very first meet him in series 1, the vainness, I'd argue now, is a lot more toned down. I think in the first few seasons we've not complained, criticised this before. The first few seasons he wasn't really a main part of the team, if you like. He was just sort of like the side funny character who'd pop in, say a funny one-liner, act really vain and out there, and do a few twirls. He never liked twirls anymore. He doesn't do the wow. He did a James Brown yell and stuff. But so he's much more part of the team now, which I personally quite like. He feels integrated with it all. But yeah, I think the vain aspects have been a lot. They've been played down as the series has.
Do you miss
progressed.
the twirls, Adam?
I do miss the twirls.
That was a very fun. Wow! Impression.
Honestly, just if you
I'll have to
YouTube,
go back
just,
and find
just type
twirls.
cat like twirls, and you'll see. Oh, they were glorious. I did love those. But
also go and check out the tongue-tied song, which was like a pre-title sequence at the beginning of one episode, which is basically a full-on musical number with Danny John Jules singing and dancing. Check it out; it's great.
Yeah, and it got in the charts, number 17. So there you go. Fun fact. But as they're in the cockpit, they see this tear in space.
Well, the cockpit, interestingly, for a very brief moment when they first get into the cockpit, I found myself going, oh, I wonder what Rimmer's doing. He must be out back. And for a very brief moment, because Rimmer, played by Chris had been a main character up until last episode, and he departed the series last episode. And for a brief moment, I forgot that he'd left, and then I remembered, and then I was sad.
Yeah, I was a bit sad seeing that empty chair.
So I've heard of Rimmer because I think I've heard the name come up with fans who've mentioned Red Dwarf. So I knew he was a character, but then obviously was like, I've not met this character this episode because I was kind of because I know we do get the flashback with him.
Yes, yeah.
But I didn't. I had no context. So everyone watching that would have been like, "It's Rimmer! It's Rimmer!" And I was just like, "Who is this guy?
Who is this man?
Yeah.
Who's
Why
this
is he
guy?"
acting like a bit of a git?
Yeah.
He had literally left the previous episode as well, so it was all fresh for us.
Yeah, all fresh. But they don't
It's nice
dwell on
that,
it.
yeah, he does appear in a flashback later, and it's nice we get to see him again.
Yeah, absolutely. And after we embrace the sadness of the empty chair, they head straight towards this tear in space, and they realise, they've gone through it, they've made it through, but there's a disturbance in the engineering deck, and there they find, I believe they call it a hyperway, is what they call like the little portal that they step through. There was a lot of jargon flying about, so I was like, right, what are they saying? What's this called?
They call it the Linkway as well, don't they?
The Linkway, yes, they do.
So
they change it to whatever they want it to be. One thing? Well, it sort of happens in this episode, and we'll get basically, Sophie, if you decide to watch any more Red Dwarf, continuity as we know it doesn't exist.
Okay.
They'll change things and you'll be like, wait, hang on, and then but the show doesn't care. Like, the show literally is like, we're just gonna do this now, and like the best option we found is just to go, okay, whatever, just go for it.
It's fine.
But then sometimes it will call back to a really obscure moment from like 2 seasons back, and you're like, oh, they remembered that. But they don't remember the big life-changing decision that happened like last episode.
They'll move straight on. But in the hyper or linkway, in the nice blue portal, they bump into they go into a parallel dimension where they bump into themselves. And I've got to say, I don't know what you two think. The CG, considering this was in 1997 on a BBC budget, I thought wasn't too bad. Or like whatever effects they were using for the tunnel.
I mean, I didn't expect much from it to begin with, so I haven't seen. Comparatively, I've not seen what the effects were like before, so that's quite hard for me to judge. But I mean, I knew what they like. For me, CG is it believable within the context of what's being made, and considering it's a sci-fi comedy, I'm not expecting it to look very good. Yeah. If that makes sense. So like, I was like, oh, I know what this is. I understand the context.
Yeah.
They almost fell into no space. That looks like a crack that they've almost fallen into. Oh, look, they're being shot at. You know, like, if I understand what's going on, that's the most important part for me for CG. I actually sometimes prefer shoddier CG as long as I understand what's going on, compared to really flashy CG that's very confusing. Because that also happens a lot. That's valid,
yeah.
Yeah, I hate like really shiny over the top CG.
What's an example? Can you think of an example of that where something is really good CG but it's just so confusing?
Off the top of my head, no. I'll have to get back to you on it. But I'm sure I've seen trailers for films I've just gone, now that is a film that thinks that it's exciting, but it's not. You know, I think like, is it Experian? There's a film called Experian that looked really like shiny and wonderful and elegant.
Was
or
that
Valerian?
Oh, Valerian, yeah.
Which I've not seen, and I'm sure, I'm really sorry everyone who worked on it, I'm sure it was wonderful. But the trailer, for me, was like, oh hey, is this what people think sci-fi is? Like, people who don't know that's how it felt. It was a bit like, okay.
You know what? I think I've thought of an example. The Terminator movies and the transformations of all of the things, which look brilliant, but not all the time, but sometimes just look like they confuse the scene, because, like, especially when Michael Bay is doing everything at once in explosions going off and all sorts of things, you can't really tell what's happening with the machines at the time.
Were you on about Terminator, or do you mean Transformers?
What did I say?
You said Terminator.
And
I said
that's
Terminator.
why I sort of went like...
No,
even
I don't mean
I saw
Terminator.
Adam and I went, Terminator isn't that bad.
I meant Transformers. Transformers.
I agree with you with Transformers. I think it can
Yes,
certainly do that, yeah. So, it's really flashy, but what's happening?
I think my example for that would be James Cameron's Avatar, which I remember at the time really... Because, they hyped it up. Oh, it's all this new technology, and it's going to be this immersive... And, at the... What was it, 2009? I was like, yeah, for sure, it looks nice, but... I just remember being so disappointed that, for me at least, I'm sure it's got its fans out there, the story for me just didn't really connect, because so much of like the focus was like, look, we've made this world, look at it, it's all CG, look at it, do you know what I mean? That was my example. It was just a bit lacking for me, but yeah, but like you say, we get this as a tunnel, the no space effect I quite liked. And they meet themselves, which would you be surprised, Sophie? This is not the first time this has happened in this show. I've lost count as how many times it has been, Phil.
Yeah, different alternate universes, future versions of themselves, past versions of themselves. They're always meeting themselves.
Cool. Gives the actors a good challenge.
Yeah.
But they learn in this other reality that Lister did in fact die and become a hologram. He didn't get put in stasis, which is how our Lister was able to survive in Red Dwarf when everyone else died, and he explains why. And this is where we get the flashback, of course, where we see a bit of ChrisBarrie as Rimmer, and we also get the reintroduction of Christine Kotchanski, who is played by a different actor to who's appeared before. This is Chloe Annette, I believe her name is, and there's nothing against Chloe's performance. It might be because I've gone in chronological. I personally preferred the first actor who played Kotchanski, both in like characterization and what they were going for.
And suddenly she's not Scottish anymore.
And not Scottish. No Scottish accent.
She was Scottish before, and now she's not Scottish.
Oh, I love Scottish accents. So I'd kill to see a Scottish.
Yeah, well, if you go and watch series 1 and 2, there's lots of flashbacks to before the accident that wipes out the Red Dwarf crew, where he's interacting with the original Kotchanski, and she's Scottish there, and suddenly not very Scottish anymore. Suddenly a very RP accent.
Yeah, yeah. If you like Scottish, it's not like a subtle Scottish. It's very Scottish, and it's like, oh yes, give me more regional accents. Yes, please.
I was going to ask you, Adam, how you felt the change. I mean, this is the first episode. This is not like, as we know from the end of the episode, she's sticking with this crew for a bit.
Yes.
We're going to see more of her, so your opinions might change. But just based on this episode, currently not a fan, or just not as much as...
It's not that I'm not a fan. I mean, I think the character it is still a character. I'm not saying she's one note or anything, but I don't know. I just... From what we've seen so far, I just preferred... The characterization of Kotchanski seemed a bit deeper than it was this time around, but I'm also acknowledging this is a Kotchanski from a parallel universe, so she's not necessarily going to be like the Kotchanski we saw. So, no, I'm here for it. But yeah, so this whole, again, Sophie, for you then, this whole flashback scene, was this your chance to be like, right, yes, okay, they're saying this, so, and then that happened? Was that what it was like, or...?
Flashback was really odd. I didn't really know what was going on because they just said, "Oh, I'm in stasis," and my head was like, "What? Were you asleep?" Like, because I had no context because I didn't watch anything else. So I watched it twice today. I watched it this morning and made notes, and I watched it this evening with dinner. And because I'd actually read up on what happened to Lister, because that's all I wanted to know was, okay, I want to have that context.
Yeah.
Without the context, I was like, was he on holiday? Oh, he wasn't. Oh, okay. So he went AWOL. Okay, then he has a cat. Okay. This guy seems funny. I hope because I really liked the introduction of Rimmer in that way, because I didn't know who Rimmer was. So it was just like this guy just teasing him about his type of woman was quite funny, and I was like, oh, I like him. And then I was like, oh, that's the only time we get to see him. I was like, oh, that's really annoying. And then, like, the whole scene with the cat in the microwave, genuinely, my brain just went, excuse me, not realising that had anything to do with cat. Because why would I?
Yeah.
It's interesting how coming into a series with no background, like, you realise how clueless you actually are and how you actually should watch stuff from the beginning.
That's true, yeah, because, I mean, I started watching Red Dwarf when I was about 7, and it was around about the time Series 6 was on the air. And so I also would have come in with no context of what was going on, but I can't remember, like, if that confused me. Like, I didn't know when I started watching it that Dave had been in suspended animation for 3 million years, or anything like that. I must have just picked that up gradually from watching episodes, I guess, but I didn't start that way. But this must be a particular, with all the flashbacks and stuff, this must be a particularly confusing episode to come in not knowing anything.
Oh yeah, it was particularly frustrating a bit, but at the same time, it was still really fun because my brain was like trying to fill in the gaps myself. I was like, okay, so I kind of had a vague understanding that something had happened to Lister that shouldn't have happened, or something like that, because of that's how there's 2 alternate versions, and that in one version she survived, but I didn't quite realise that he was the last one. That was my brain was not understanding that he is the last human until I read he was the last human, which then made sense why she was the last woman who might want children. I was like, if she wants children, surely there's other people, because my brain didn't realise there wasn't any other people. I was like, mate, are you what? Like, if you don't like him, you don't have to ask him for his sperm. Like, jeez, because I had no context for why that would be a thing. But obviously, watching it the second time around, I was like, oh, this makes so much more sense now, and why that scene is a lot funnier.
I suppose as well, though, even because again, this was 97, so even, back then, it's still, I'd argue, trading on the fact that it hopes that most people who are watching have watched before. I think I think if anyone had watched that on broadcast, like you've done today, they'd be like, wait, what's going on? And with early days of the internet and stuff and VHS, people might not have had the full context. So in a way, I think it's quite a bold thing to do, to tell us part of a story that relays so heavily on stuff that was established in terms of broadcast dates 9 years ago. So that's a big leap. Because
it was, 97, wasn't it? So,
this episode, this was 97.
Obviously 97, you didn't really have Sky. You didn't have any other channels. So likelihood is certain types of fans were going to be committed to watching this all the way through and would have watched. So, like, I don't know, that's like Doctor Who fans, right? Like, they all tune in and watch it all the time, and they would have, got together and watched the VHSs so they were available. So likelihood is they were appealing to their audiences already. So, especially with the way that TV worked then compared to now, like, I found it on BritBox and watched it. Whenever I wanted, I went on Wikipedia and found the write-up. So easy for me. Where when I was 7, I think Sky was barely becoming a thing.
Yeah.
I remember The Simpsons very vaguely.
Yeah,
but that was
Sky had started in the late 80s, but I don't think it caught on
in homes.
And it was quite very expensive initially.
It was.
And so it didn't catch on quite widespreadly until the sort of Sky Digital started, which was sort of the late 90s, I think.
I mean, we didn't get. I don't think we had Sky until as late as like 2008, 2009. So and only then was it seen as like a viable thing to do. So I think back then, like the late night, the only people I knew who had Sky were either not their people's wealthy uncles, if you like. The people who they always had to have like the new technology. So it's like, I bought a satellite dish. Don't really know what it does, but I bought one. Or like if you went on holiday and sometimes where you'd stay, you'd have a Skybox. But aside from that, it was quite elusive.
So I wonder if that obviously added a bit to like not having to worry so much about their audiences were going to tune in, because I think. Am I correct in saying that there was like a big hiatus between 6 and 7?
Yeah, it was. Yes, I have
Phil
lamented.
Experienced it.
I experienced this because, as I said earlier, I got into it. I mean, the listeners to this podcast have heard me talk about this more times than they're probably fed up of me saying this now. But I got into it around Series 6, and so I'd just gotten into it. Series 6 ended on a cliffhanger. And then I had to wait 3 years till the next episode. And I was just like, I've just got into this show. I want to find out what happens
So
next.
with something like that, obviously people who are invested and have watched 1 to 6 are definitely going to tune in for 7. And they're going to be the audience that they're going to want to pull back in more than anything. Like the public, obviously, if it's on, it's on. But I assume it would have had... I mean, as far as I'm aware, it had good enough acclaim for it to bring in people to watch it anyway.
Yeah,
So, I don't know.
So yeah. It's funny looking at all the all the potentials and what ifs, isn't it?
Yeah.
In that flashback, I was going to point out one line. I love the line from Rimmer when because Lister's lamenting about the fact that he's been dumped by Kotchanski, and Rimmer goes something along the lines of, "Your type isn't Kotchanski, it's somebody called Tiffany."
Yes.
Somebody who says something instead of something. And various other things that he says about
Like
this
crotchless
mythical...
panties, I think he says.
Yeah,
And I was like...
that was one.
I couldn't
like,
help, especially with that something,
Something.
that he was alluding to the infamous Essex girl sort of stereotype that as someone from Essex...
I think it's the end of that little segment where he says like she who laughs like she's a pained moose tied to a cement mixer or something like that, and I was my God, you're an interesting guy. I would like to meet you again. He likes his little.
When he said that, in my head, I was imagining that character from Only Fools and Horses,
Boise, yeah,
Boise's wife. Because she laughs a bit like that, doesn't she?
There's a few like stereotype jokes. Like, there's one earlier I forgot to mention when he's doing the nose hairs and they're saying, "Oh, women don't get nose hairs." And then was it apart from women who work in Oxfam shocks? And I was like, now. I was like, come on. It was 97, whatever. But I was like, come on, guys, we couldn't have thought of a better joke there.
I think what's probably happened there, and it is unfortunate to say, is that stereotypically the people watching this show are probably young men. It's like the whole for me, like watching the sequence where Kotchanski and Lister are talking in the flashback, and he's like, "Oh, I don't want to spend all our time in bed," and she's something like, "Yeah, but I don't want to spend all my time in bed having takeaways and fantastic sex." And I was just like, "This was written by men for men. This is not written for me." It had that men behaving badly vibe where it was kind of like this woman is designed for men to lust over. That's how it felt. But I still found it entertaining. But even so, I had to bear in mind that, this was written in the 90s. This couldn't be written anymore without lots of complaints.
Yeah. I mean, that is true. But I do like the fact that later on, Kotchanski does kind of push back against that attitude a little bit herself in the script. So it's like they are aware of that. They are aware of what they're leaning into in their characters, and they've now got a character who can push back against it, which is quite good, I think.
And on pushing back, when they're in this time tunnel, after we've had this time tunnel, I'm in Doctor Who mode there. When they're in the
linkway,
that's it. Thank you, Sophie. The linkway. I need to write this terminology down. When they're in the linkway, after they've finished reminiscing about this flashback, the Gelf attack. Now, the Gelf are a race who've popped up once or twice before, and in those episodes they were a bit more integral. Here, they just sort of seem to be used for, it's a name. To the viewer, it's a name you've heard, but that's it. Do you know what I mean? They're not really focused on here, which I thought was an odd choice. But it does kind of
carry on the plot from that last Gelf episode, though, because
where they want revenge?
Yeah, because in a previous episode, you may have picked up from this, Dave Lister was forced to marry one of these sort of creatures, and in order to exchange for a part they needed for the ship, and then he ran away. So they're kind of chasing him for that. To reunite with his bride.
Typical. Sorry, go on.
I was gonna say, I did enjoy the pictures. Like, oh no, it's the missus, and I was like, wait, what? And this is this picture of like this kind of caveman-esque creature. And I was just like, I have no context for this, but okay, sure.
Just roll with it. Yeah, I just love how they knew they were there. In typical Red Dwarf fashion, the plot and continuity happens for itself. And now I've just thought about that picture. Basically, the Gelf, when we met them last series or whenever it was, If you've ever seen the Wookiee outfits from the Star Wars Holiday Special, I'd say that with maybe less fur. But I don't know, now I'm thinking about it, it gives me that kind of... The vibe that only the Star Wars Holiday Special has, and if people haven't seen it, I would recommend it, but I don't think I will. So, but that's your context for that. And the linkway breaks, and Kotchanski falls, and they rescue her in quite a comical fashion, but she ends up on their side. So,
and they rescue her with his stuck to his teeth floss, which is brilliant.
Typical Red Dwarf comedy. He's got teeth of steel. In fact, his teeth are ripped out as well.
It's gotta hurt.
Gotta hurt. When they're in the medical bay,
before we get to that, we haven't mentioned the fact that he stood there facing the woman he lost, that he still fancies, in not only with floss hanging out of his mouth, but in a fluffy pink dressing gown. With cotton wool in his ears and just generally looking a mess. Is this what you were alluding to earlier when you said that the other events, because basically he wants to impress Kotchanski. So that's why he's kind of maybe comes across as a bit more vain in this episode than in other episodes, because he actually does care in this episode of what he looks like because he wants to impress her.
This is what I was thinking. That's why I was like, oh, maybe he is vain. But obviously, with you giving me more context of he's not usually like that at all, that's quite interesting that suddenly he's now vain because there's a pretty lady involved, or someone he does obviously care about or loved before. So it does interest me because this whole episode feels like, especially up to that point, he's like, this is bad. But if he wasn't vain, I would expect the opposite of being like, well, she'd like me anyway. If that makes sense.
Yeah, because his counterpart is very, smartly dressed.
Yeah,
he speaks well, and someone that has his shit together by the looks of it.
Yeah,
he does.
Whereas our Lister, sadly, not so much.
Yeah, I was a little bit. I'll talk the counterparts as well. I was going to mention because we kind of get a little bit from counterpart Crichton, who's gold rather than the black or silver or whatever color Crichton is this season. And there's the cat there as well, who just stands there. The alternative cat doesn't do anything. And this is a reoccurring thing with Cat. When there's something that we get something from each of the crew, there was like, when in season 6, they all came out of stasis and we got a bit of Lister kind of adjusting to coming out of stasis. We got a bit of how the story of Rimmer being rebooted. He was a hologram, by the way. But we don't get anything from Cat. He just appears. We never get that story, and that seems to happen every time there's something where we get, oh, this is this bit of the story for this member of the crew. This is this bit of the story for this member of the crew. Oh yeah, and Cat's just there.
Yeah, it's a bit of a shame, isn't it? It makes you wonder whether they actively didn't, think to like write something for that moment, or if they just couldn't. I'd like to think they couldn't. That it wasn't they couldn't think of anything, but yeah, it is a shame that this keeps popping up.
I just would like to have seen what alternate Cat was like if he was different.
A bit more of a personality, but alas, unless they pop up again, we'll never know. But in the medical bay, when Kotchanski wakes up, there's this bit which I must admit I'm a bit mixed on, because she wakes up, sees Lister, and mistakes him for her Lister, and then she starts to kiss him. And at first, Lister does the right thing by trying to be like, oh, I think you're mistaken, and then it descends into, he's like, oh, all right, I'll kiss you. And she even says, when she realizes it's either her or, oh no, it is her, says it, not Crichton. Oh, like, you were trying, so you take advantage of like kissing me or something along those lines. And again, the whole thing, I don't know if uncomfortable is the word, but just a bit like, do you know what I mean? Like, it wasn't necessarily the nicest. I don't know what you two thought of that whole scene.
Well, I didn't mind it being in the episode. Because I think the episode is quite clear that it's not okay. And especially, this is what I was talking about with her pushing back. This is one of those moments where, she says, I can't believe you took advantage at that moment, blah, blah, blah. And so I don't begrudge it being in the episode, because I think the episode is clear and the writing is clear that it's wrong. It's just, it's a character flaw in Lister. I don't know. What do you think, Sophie?
I think I agree with you in that sense because the thing is, she doesn't let him speak.
Yeah.
So again, you've got that thing of he tries to tell her, "Oh wait, I'm not." So his immediate reaction at first is to be like, "I'm not him," and she tells him to shush. So he's like, "Well, okay." So that's wrong on his part, but also wrong on hers. So like there is I am also slightly conflicted on it because, you know, that's not something you really want to show. And if I remember rightly, there is a laughter track on it, so it is perceived to be funny, which I think is the problem. If there wasn't a laughter track in that moment, then maybe it wouldn't be such an awkward moment. But like, obviously the laughter track is used to be like, this is when you're supposed to find it funny. And you're like, that's not funny. And then obviously she does push back, and then she tells him off, and he's like, well, fine. So, you know, at least he doesn't like continually pursue it. If he was continually pursuing her throughout the episode in a really weird, creepy way, and there was still a laughter track, I would feel differently about it. But he doesn't seem to be like that, from my memory anyway. For the rest of the episode, that's like the only time that really happens. And it's actually from then on, it's more about how Crichton feels about her more than how he feels about her, which I loved. So yeah,
which is a lot more funny, which we'll get to in just a second. We get the whole thing in with the Gelf attacking again, and where we see the picture and Crichton speaking Gelf, which is quite hilarious because Robert Llewellyn turns from 0 to 100, from normal speaking to I can't. Just phlegm, isn't it? In his book, pretty much.
I feel for his throat after performing that. You know, he's got to have a really sore throat after doing that.
Whatever it is, it's amazing.
He's so good. He's one of the... Well, he's just a funny actor, isn't he, Robert Llewellyn? We've said this before. He's great, absolutely great as Crichton. They outrun them. With Kotchanski's help, they trick the Gelf into crashing onto this icy planet. And
More
I think
good model shots here.
Yes, I'm so glad it was models, because with this series, when we started with it, Sophie, this was like the first one where they started using CGI. They'd made that transition from being exclusively model shots to, okay, maybe we'll do a few CG for, like, you know, space sequences and stuff. But yeah, I am so glad that we still get some great model work like this, because when it works, oh my God, it really works.
It worked really well. I was impressed with the models. I was just like, yeah, this is good sci-fi. Woo!
Big part of good sci-fi, good model shots.
It was cool though, because obviously, because I drew the spaceships, I recognised the Starbug. They're in the Starbug, right?
Yes,
at this point. And I was just like, yes, I recognised the ship. I knew which one was which. Which was really sad of me to be like, yeah.
One thing I forgot to mention earlier, talking about the ships, is that in the flashback, we saw Red Dwarf for the first time since end of season 5, because they've lost Red Dwarf by this point. That's part of the plot. They've literally lost the big ship, and they're only on this tiny small ship with not very many supplies. And so I was like, oh, it's Red Dwarf. I haven't seen that in like 2 years, 2 seasons or something.
Yeah, nice little throwback. Once they've ditched him, they're like, all right, we'll have a bit of a cool down, and we get this lovely scene with Crichton and Lister. So what did we all think of this, Sophie? We'll
it's
start
my
with you.
favourite scene in the episode. I love Crichton so much. So you're lying. So how it's like his voice goes up really high. And I love the way of describing a naked woman with her in and outy bits. I was just like, because I have no context for this character or Lister really, apart from this episode. So I'm just like, Crichton in love with you? Crichton's in love with you. This is great. LGBT represent. It's great. I was like, that's such a cool concept. Obviously, I know it's played for laughs in the episode more than anything else, but I did love that.
So she walked in here now and took all her clothes off and said, "Ew, make love to me, you horny dude." And I said, "Oh, perhaps you'd prefer to fold some sheets with me instead, sir." What would you do?
You can see Lester go like, what kind of sheets? I was just like, that's brilliant.
Yeah,
that's really
I like the way the list is trying to make it believable that he's really like considering it and like, oh yeah, well, so what kind of sheets are they? And how would
with the
we
pattern,
with the pattern, and would we fold them? How would we fold them? And could I fold them this way? Oh yeah, well of course I would do the sheets with you, obviously, and not have sex with her.
And that brilliant beat of "You're lying."
Yeah. It's the change in his face and his voice, and I love it. Obviously, this is a sci-fi sitcom, but it was like the whole thing was almost amped up in that traditional sitcom. We're having a sitcom argument, and it's all a bit heightened and a bit crazy and a bit believable in a weird way, isn't it? You know, sitcom arguments, I think, are very like that in a lot of them, where it's like, I can't believe you do this, and it's like, oh no, honey, I wouldn't do this. No, you're lying. I don't know. It that made me laugh even harder because it made me think of all those other sitcoms where you see arguments like that, and it's exactly the same, but with the Red Dwarf twist, which makes it even funnier. So yeah,
absolutely. And there's a nice another continuity reference here, because Crichton says, I'm going to end up on my own, just like on the Nova 5, and the Nova 5 was the ship they found him on, because he didn't originally come with Red Dwarf. They found him in the beginning of season 2, and he was on a ship and his crew had died. And then there's a line in this that then Dave says, "You killed the crew, Crichton, even if it was by accident." And that's not a reference to something we'd known from the TV series. That's a reference to something from the novels.
It is.
Because they're the novels that me and Adam are reading at the moment, because we're going to review those at some point. In that, we discover that Crichton accidentally cleaned the inside of the machinery, which then caused some malfunction, which then crashed the ship he was on and killed all of his crew. So it's his fault they all died. And so I just like the fact that that's like, I think it's the one and only time they reference something from the novels.
Yeah, I think so. Neat little bit there. And we establish in the scene as well that obviously Crichton is not a fan of this version of Kotchanski. And we have a little scene with the pair of them at like the little laptops, not really pressing the keys, but you know, sci-fi sitcom, we'll let it slide. What did you both think about like this little confrontation then? Because Kotchanski knows. I mean, she says it straight away, doesn't she? She's like, "You don't like me, do you?"
Yeah, it was good, and there was you start to see a bit of Kotchanski's character here as well, because there's a little bit of neediness and needing to be liked as well, because she's like, "No, why don't you like me?" basically about it, and she can't quite handle the fact that Crichton doesn't like her and why. But then as soon as he like says it, she's like, "What? That's a stupid reason."
What did you think, Sophie? This little
no, it was a nice little scene. I think about how just women are written in the 90s generally. It's fascinating. Obviously, it's 2021. This was written a long time ago, made a long time ago, and I have to admit, I think part of me was like, are they trying to show a strong woman but keep her feminine, or are like, because it is written by two men as far as I know as well.
Yes, yeah.
4 men with this very hot woman now on the ship who's supposed to be a cell, and I'm like, I wonder. Again, most of her scenes, she comes across very sexy. Even when she's like, they're playing down her femininity, there's a case of, it's like, oh, I don't know, maybe it's because of my own experiences that I'm kind of sat there going, I feel like that line was written in just to make her seem weaker in that scene.
That's a good
Does that
point.
make sense?
I hadn't considered actually, but that I can see that.
I think it's a really it's a good line to have in there, but I also feel like it felt a little bit out of character from what we'd already seen of her. So she was pushing back so much of everyone else. So
because I think to me it felt when I was watching it felt like it was humanizing her slightly, because I think up to this point she'd been kind of putting on a shirt, like a front, because she's being very guarded against these people that she doesn't really know, who look like people she knows but aren't the people she knows, and therefore she's been like a bit defensive quite naturally. And so this was the first moment that I felt she'd been kind of slightly humanized. But I completely get what you're saying as well, that the potential problematic nature of that exact line.
Well, I think it'd be interesting because if it was the case of, oh hey, these people look like my friends and they're not my friends, that would have been a much more interesting way of playing that scene, of being like, oh no, me and the other Crichton, we get on really well, and he'd be like, no, or whatever, and you could play it off that way, and her be like, oh, you know, that would be a much more humanizing way of playing that scene out. But again, we can't imagine what was in their minds, however many 20 odd years ago. It's hard to know what really the aim of that segment is, apart from making sure that she knows that he doesn't like her. That's the whole point of the scene. So I guess just her being like, oh, you don't like me, for me personally felt like it was quite a unnecessary line. Like, I feel like all the other scenes beforehand, like how well she dealt with stuff, felt like she should have just been like, well, if you don't like me, that's fine. Even if they showed it better that she was hurt by it, I don't feel like it was something that she would say. If that makes sense.
Almost like she shouldn't need to be like, she shouldn't hinge on the fact that Crichton doesn't like her and the way she was portrayed to in the episode. Yeah.
Because I think it could have been really interesting if you'd played it and said that she looked hurt instead of actually having to say, you don't like me, like, why don't you like me? It does sound like something that, you know, like what they do in like sitcoms where like, oh, you didn't text me back. It makes the girl feel more needy and needing them more, where she doesn't come across like that.
Yeah,
for most of the rest of the episode.
No, and in fact, she kind of earlier on in the episode when they are escaping the Gelf, and she's like the one that is the competent one, and she's reeling off all these kind of like follow these coordinates and all this techno, and everyone else is like, we don't know what you're talking about because we are not very good at this.
We're incompetent.
So I feel like that. I think that was more of a suggestion somewhere of, oh no, she should be more needy because that's what the men watching would probably enjoy more. Because I think, and again, this is just a thought that I had, is that men watching the show at that point, and like the fan base being predominantly male, see themselves in people like Dave and Rimmer, I'd assume. So they want the sexy, attractive sci-fi woman to be interested in them, and for her to be probably likely to be able to, you know, bend to that. I mean, she's the only woman left like in the world, so I'm assuming that's also a big part of it. Is like, you know, she's the only woman left. That means that, you know, and in this case, Lister's the only man left, so he's the only one that she can be with anyway. Which is, again, as a woman watching, really interesting to think about while watching this very random sci-fi. So it's a bit deep, but you know, it makes you think about all those things about how what this show was designed for back then, if that makes sense. A bit like how Doctor Who have usually only female companions because they know that, you know, all the guys want to be the Doctor because they want to be with the girl too. You know, that mentality, I think, was probably there a bit.
They have a brief bit of respite, the two of them, when they realise that the Linkway, they found it. So they share a high five because she wants to go home and he's like, I've got rid of her. Is this the scene where the cat comes in as well? Because the cat has these little moments. It's at the start of that scene,
the cat seems to be, his main purpose in this episode seems to be, he seems to kind of want to impress her as well. He keeps on coming in, he keeps on calling her baby and coming in and like telling her he's done something like so that she'll be impressed or something.
Which I would argue is very much Kat's character. That sort of vein, you know, hey, I'm impressive, I'm confident, I'm all that sort of thing. After they have, you know, they have a few drinks. I think this is the scene where Crichton does like the various walks, isn't it? Like he demonstrates the walks.
Her walk, because he criticizes her walk, and then of course he does his normal walk. Well, it's not really his normal walk, but he doesn't usually walk like that all over the place. But it's meant to be his normal walk here. Like he's not putting it on, and she criticizes that, and he's like, "Oh no, at least it's not like this." And then he does this hip wiggle thing. Which again, I'm not really sure.
Which I don't think she really does. No, I was going to say it doesn't really happen. So again, questions could be asked there. You know, that's. We quit. It doesn't stay there long though, because we go to a rare quieter scene in Red Dwarf between Lister and Kotchanski, and to be honest, so these don't happen very often in this show, where two characters just sort of, they're in a space where no one else is, and they just have a scene, like a more traditional dramatic. We've seen a few glimpses. We've had a few with Lister and Rimmer in the past, or with two of the other characters, but I actually quite like this scene. I've said to Phil before, even though I know Red Dwarf primarily is a comedy, that is its like main selling point, that's its function, I do like it when it goes for like more traditionally, I guess, dramatic elements as well, like when they just have the odd scene where we're not really going to play it for jokes, we're just going to talk about. I really like this scene. I don't know what you two thought. I thought this was quite a nice little scene.
Yeah. No, I liked it a lot. I think in contrast to the scene where they were trying to show her to look like, or at least how it seemed like, it felt like they'd written in something to make her seem more subservient to Crichton and having that thing. The relationship they've obviously designed with Lister, because they've obviously had history within the show. Now that I know that does make sense, that they are able to have this one-to-one, and for her to be like, well, I'll take care of our baby, which I thought was really nice. I thought there was like that did sound like something she would do, because we know she's competent. It's like, no, I'll take care of it. Like, I want a kid and I want to take care of it. Which does sound, again, a more competent version of whoever wrote that scene, definitely more competent. You know, like, it's like, we've gone down the good route. And actually, I loved how Lister talked about the fact that he felt like he was always drifting. Because I have no concept of what his life was like, because I've never watched it before, but I assumed he was a bit of a scatterbox, that he, you know, because the sci-fi shows I have watched tend to have a leading character just kind of losing their way. Like, if it's Doctor Who or if it's Firefly, it's them just kind of getting on with stuff. So it does kind of make sense that that's what Lister's like as well. Not that I knew what his background was before this. So him being like, oh, I feel like, you know, I've always been drifting because of this fact that I was left in a box under a... And I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Right.
I think you're pretty much right. Like, Lister's always been portrayed as sort of that, well, said like a slob, but in the sense of he just sort of rolls through life. You know, he hasn't really got a grand plan as such. He just sort of, I guess, muddles through.
Yeah, like as a teenager, he had a band and he was going to make it big as a band, as a band member and things. He's got that kind of personality. I really like this scene as well, because it did, like you say, it did feel like it slowed down a little bit and really felt like a genuine moment between the two of them.
Yeah.
And it leads up to them almost kissing. And that also felt genuine. It didn't feel like she was just doing it because she felt she had to. It felt like they'd had a connection in that moment and would generally kiss it there. And then, of course, it's good. It's brilliantly undercut by then Crichton just like literally getting in between them with his duster and getting in the way of the kiss.
I could almost imagine him, like, I know we don't see it, but I imagine him like standing at the door, out of shot, like watching, and then just like running in. But yeah, bringing it back to the comedy. They often do that with the quieter moments. They'll have the quieter moment, and it's like, right, now here's a joke, right, we're back. And
I think in a show like this, you've got to, really.
Yeah, well, yeah. No,
I mean, they do it with, I don't know if you guys have ever really watched Only Fools and Horses, but some of my favourite scenes in Only Fools and Horses have been really deep, dramatic scenes that are then completely undercut by something tremendously funny, and you're close to tears one moment and then you're crying with laughter because you're emotionally broken, and now you're laughing because that scene was so intense, and then something really funny happens. Like, I think the best comedies are able to do both, so it was really nice to have that slow scene. I was genuinely impressed. I was like, I was not expecting that kind of scene in this, because obviously, you know, we began with him getting wood glue sticking to his teeth and floss. I was not expecting such a sweet scene between them. So yeah, it's cool.
Yeah, no, good scene. And you know, he hands over his side, if you like, and says, right, off you go then, back to your parallel dimension. But then they come across this box that they've left, which turns out to read Ouroboros.
Ouroboros.
In my head, I was like, it's one syllable. You're not saying Ouroboros. Ouroboros batteries. And obviously, Lister stops and is like, wait a minute. So it's not the very Scouse Ouroboros. Ouroboros. I love that at the start, by the way, when they said that. I was like, yes. I was like, because
they can't decide on the name. It's Ouroboros.
Ouroboros?
Because I know, some parts of the UK say "our" to refer to, like, their kids and stuff, but never in my life. So it happens a bit here in South Yorkshire, but never in my life have I heard it more when I lived in Liverpool. You'd be, our kids, our so-and-so, like, even at work, they'd be like, oh, hello, our Adam. And I'm like, I'm not your child, but okay. Like, I'll just roll with it. So when they said, oh, Ouroboros, I was like, oh my goodness. Love a bit of authentic Scouse. But no, it's a battery company. And then Lister deduces in this split second that he is, in fact, his own father.
Oh, yeah. Very, very timey-wimey, which I love, but the implications.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that basically I was happy, but then I kind of went, wait, what?
Yeah, it's the brief like, oh, and then you go, ah.
Because as he points out, it means Kotchanski is both his ex-girlfriend, who obviously he slept with, and his mum.
Yeah, and then it makes it worse when he's chasing after her in the tunnel and goes, Mum!
Yeah, it definitely puts a whole new twist on the Oedipus complex.
Just a little bit, yeah. But just, timely in typical Red Dwarf plot convenience. So just as they're about to solve it, the Gelfs are back and they decide to destroy the tunnel once again. And Kotchanski falls and, this time just falls, seemingly. Just falls and falls into no space.
And falls.
I love that phone call so much. It was just so funny. It's like, there's an obscene phone call here, sir. Yes, I'll stay. If you save me, that's the proviso. Okay.
If you get me from
I'm calling you. I'm still falling. Please help. Help.
And then he shoots her with the grappling gun type thing, and that's when she does the obscene phone call, because she's like,
oh yeah.
What I didn't get about this scene, though, is that why only they could save her and not the other crew?
Is it implied that they didn't have the equipment?
Well, I suppose they had got that, but they didn't know what they were looking for when they went back to get equipment. They didn't, they just were looking through boxes and came across it and were like, oh yeah, this will do. So I didn't quite get why her own crew couldn't be the ones to save her.
It's Red Dwarf.
Other than plot convenience and the need to get her as a regular cast member.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree with you though, Sophie. The phone call aspect was brilliant as she's just falling into nothingness. But of course, they get her back up and she's on their side, seemingly now stuck with our boys from the dwarf. But the episode doesn't finish there, which surprised me because that feels like quite a round off for an episode, like a cliffhanger moment. Although I will say, when they patch her up in the med bay and Crichton obviously comes to have another beef with her, the shot, when she walks out and Crichton's got her back to her, he looks really evil, and he's like, happy to have you aboard. And then he's just sort of got that smile. He's sort of looking up sort of towards the camera. I was like, whoa, what?
Well, that's because she's got her pants showing. And he's like, oh, I'm not going to tell you, ha ha ha. So that you have to go in so you'll go and get embarrassed.
Yeah.
See, I didn't read it like that. I read it that she had a different walk.
Oh, okay.
Okay, yeah.
So I read it like he was taking the mick out of her walk. Because I don't think a mechanoid would care if you're butt showing.
Well, I think he knows that it would embarrass her. And that's why that would make sense. Because it's almost like he's about to tell her so that she can fix it. And then you can see it on his face. He decides, no, it'll be funny if I just let her do it.
Proper like Mr. Evil sort of like.
Yeah.
But no,
mine was... Sorry, go on.
I was going to say, for me, I thought it was to do with the walk, because she was obviously walking funny, and obviously there had been this whole thing about how she walks and how he walks. So I thought, in my head, for some reason, I didn't really think about the fact that she's going to have her butt hanging out. I don't think she'd really care about that. My brain was just like, oh, he's laughing because her walk is now different. Ha ha ha, isn't that funny? Because he's a weird mechanoid. You'd find that particularly amusing. I don't know. That was what I
See, mine was way more than I got a full Norman Bates psycho vibe that he just he was plotting he just thought of some really evil scheme that we're gonna see in the next episode, and he's like, I'm not gonna tell you, but I'm gonna pull a creepy smile and look. So that's weird how we all got a different vibe from just a look, basically.
Yeah. Let us know in the comments below what you thought was going on in that scene.
Yeah. But as mentioned, that isn't the ending. We're back in the Egbert Arms 18 months later, it says, where Lister, and it's our Lister, because it's not the one with the H on his head, seemingly our Lister, brings himself to the massive paradox, Doctor Who brain's going massive paradox, but he puts himself under the pool table, which he says creates the paradox, and says means the human race will never end because he will always exist. So that's the human race in an infinite loop? Question. I wrote in my notes, I was trying to write along what was happening. I was like, right, so he's staying back to the pub. And I just wrote, what the hell is happening? What's going on?
Yeah, I suppose by making sure he exists, that's ensuring the human race exists, because then he's there to get put in stasis and carry on the human race, potentially.
Yeah.
But he's not a paradox, though.
No.
Because he says he creates...
No. He's a bootstrap paradox, isn't he?
Yeah, yeah. That makes sense. He's the bootstrap paradox. But where does that... Yeah. I
think it's just because they tried to tell us all to us in the last 30 seconds. I was like, whoa, wait, hang on. What is this? And Red Dwarf has done this before, I think we've said, where they'll try and, often for sake of time, because obviously they've only got 25 minutes, but they'll explore these scientific, or the one that I always remember is one about wormholes. They encounter a worm, about the whole time is different if you're in the wormhole to when you're out of it, or whatever it is. Time passes differently, and they explain it in about literally in about 30 seconds. And like us, if you're aware of sci-fi and work, you might be like, oh yeah, I get the idea. But I think if I'd shown that to my mum, she would have been like, wait, what? What does that mean? So yeah, I think
what we need
just
here
a lot of
is Peter Capaldi to pop up and explain bootstrap paradoxes to us.
Ba 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 ba.
While playing a guitar, yeah.
Yeah, Peter
I'm actually Beethoven.
Peter Capaldi just walks in the Egbert Arms with his guitar and says, "You don't know what's going on." But I'm here to tell you. That's a whole other story. But and then the credits roll, just before my brain had even comprehended all of this. It's all right, there's the theme music. And just before final thoughts, I don't know if you've noticed, but the baby was credited to Alexander John Jules, who I believe is Danny's son.
No, nephew.
No, nephew. Oh right, okay. There you go.
Well, according to IMDb, anyway, it's his nephew. Because apparently, when a baby was originally cast for it, it was Danny Don Jules that pointed out that the baby's skin tone didn't match Craig Charles's, and he suggested that his own nephew might be a better fit for it. And that is how his nephew got cast, apparently, according to the IMDb trivia section.
There you go. Small little world. But before we do our summary and favourite characters and all that, just Sophie, what did you think of this ending scene then? Were you happy with how this episode wrapped up?
I think it was sweet. I mean, bear in mind, I don't have any concept of what previous endings have been like. It did complete the story. We're back in the same place at the beginning of the episode as we are at the end. So it does also do its own loop that we are back in the pub again at the beginning as it was in the end. Ouroboros. But no, I think it was good. I think what he was saying to the kid was sweet. I did have a moment where I was like, wait, paradox what? My brain again, I think if he'd said this has to happen in a much more concise way.
Yeah.
I think it would have made that whole speech a little bit easier to digest, but otherwise it's you're going to be great, kid, or whatever it was that he was saying was really sweet. So I was like, that's nice. It's still weird that it's you, and it's still I still was just even the second time watching it, I went, yeah, it's still weird, mate. It's still
a bit
such an odd concept, but for a sci-fi comedy, I'm not expecting it to be highbrow. So,
sure.
And it was fun. Yeah,
there you go.
It was a good ending.
And then Phil, considering through the last 7 series, we've, every now and then, basically, they've mentioned about Lister's origins, how, his parents abandoned him in a box under the pool table. This has been the frequent explanation. So after 7 series then, and now seemingly we have our answer, as someone who's watched Red Dwarf for years, do you like this resolve?
Yeah, because it was kind of it was kind of this throwaway line before that they kind of put in there to kind of explain Lister and why he is the way he is. I was abandoned as a kid and all that. Which, hadn't left me wanting an explanation, but I like the explanation we got. It was very sci-fi, it's very timey-wimey, it's a little bit weird. But yeah, I like it. And just as a little hint, it's not going to be the last time it's referenced.
Oh, right, okay.
You obviously haven't seen past this, Adam, but it will be referenced at some point in the future.
Phil has said this to me, Sophie, numerous times throughout this part. Oh, this will be mentioned again. I can't tell you when, but just make a note of it.
Remember this.
Remember this. But that, folks, is Series 7, Episode 3, Ouroboros. We've just discussed it in depth there. So we'll move on to our regular segments of the show, the first of which is our favourite character. So, Sophie, who was your favourite character from this episode? It could be one of the mains, it could be someone who appeared for 30 seconds, whoever you'd like.
I did like Crichton a hell of a lot, I think. I liked the C-3PO vibe. I'm a sucker for a mechanoid-esque, android-esque droid. I do love them. So I loved him. I did like what I saw of Rimmer, but obviously it was a flashback Rimmer, and I don't really understand the context of what current day Rimmer would be like, because I didn't get to see him. But I did like how he, like, the kind of broship that I saw between him and Lister was quite entertaining, and I was like, I'd have liked to have seen more of that as someone who hasn't seen the rest of the show. So I was like, so I liked Crichton and I liked Rimmer.
Yeah, that kind of relationship between the two of them. I mean, the very early seasons, that's pretty much all the show was on. They didn't even go off the ship for the first 2 years, really. They just it was basically them dealing with being alone together on a spaceship, and with the cat occasionally popping up and a computer also chipping in occasionally, but mostly it was about their relationship for the first 2 years, Rimmer and Lister. So I mean, definitely, I was going to ask you, having seen this episode, are you tempted to go and watch more?
I think I might watch some more.
We've got a new convert.
I think I might go watch some more. I think the only other thing I'll say in terms of characters is Kotchanski is in my good books for not killing the cat, the alternative Kotchanski. Because I was like, you can't put the cat in a microwave. I assumed obviously it wasn't a microwave, it was something else, and my brain just went, don't kill the cat. And then she was like, I can't kill it. And I was like, yeah, okay, you've got some points. So I did like her. She did make me laugh. I think she was considering the time, I think she was quite a fun character and put the boys in their places for the most part in most of the scenes she was in. So I thought that was quite fun. But yeah, my favourites, because I'm a sucker for droids, and I'm a sucker for underdog characters, which I think Rimmer does come across as a bit of an underdog to me. I love characters like that, so I like watching characters get bullied on TV shows, obviously. So I liked them quite a bit.
Well, there you go. Point one to Crichton. What about you, Phil?
Crichton was very close. I would have, in any other episode, that probably would have got it, but I feel I've got to give it to Lister this episode. Again, we're getting quite a lot of good stuff from Lister this season, I think. It seems to be the season where he gets a lot of development, because he got quite a lot during the first series and the second series, but then the middle part, a lot. I don't think we picked him as our favourite character at all from series 3 to maybe 5 or 6, even 6 possibly, and he seems to be getting quite. I think I might have picked him last week. I can't remember now, but here he's got some lovely character development moments, and it feels like it's his episode as well.
Fair enough. Well, I've got to go with Sophie. I'm going to give it to Crichton. Just Robert Llewellyn's just great, man. Like they all are, but I find myself continuously as an actor myself, just in awe of him as a performer. Like the physicality he embodies, the vocal, it's what you'd want a good actor to be, especially in a role like that where I think mechanoids can be very, people don't sometimes go for it as much as they could, and he just does. So yeah, got to be Crichton for me. The funniest moment is the other main segment we do. So we'll start with you again, Sophie. Now this could be a whole scene. This could be one line that you found hilarious. But what was the funniest moment for you in this episode?
It's absolutely the scene where he's sat on the bed being like, I've seen her naked in the shower and you're going to want her more than me. And if I was folding sheets, that whole segment is so funny. Just because I had no context as well of what their previous relationship was like. And it was quite refreshing to see, technically, a man feeling jealous of a woman. It was like really,
yes,
you know, technically speaking, it was quite refreshing to see that on, a sci-fi sitcom. So yeah, I thought that was quite cool. And also it was very well played out and very funny, very well written. So I really enjoyed it.
Good, wonderful, great choice. Phil, your funniest moment?
I'm going for a single line. It's the missus.
It's back on our tail. What is it? Some Gelf battle cruiser.
They've sent a scan, sir. Take a look.
Oh my God, it's the missus.
Very good. Very, very good choice. Once again, I'm going to have to go with you, Sophie. That whole scene of Crichton just like melting down and in his own jealousy or whatever it is. Just, as mentioned, perfect sitcom parables, like amped up to 11. Brilliant acting from both involved. You got Crichton on one extreme, Lister trying to play it cool and act like, oh yeah, of course I'd fold sheets. Just one of my favourite moments of this series so far, I'd say, of Series 7. Really stand out. And lastly, we rate each episode out of 10 scutters. So scutters, I don't know if you've seen, so it's like the little robots with like grabber hands. That's the scutters. We haven't seen them in ages, of course, since we haven't been on Red Dwarf. But how many scutters out of 10 would you rate this episode?
I think, bear in mind I've not seen anything. I found the ending a little bit confusing with like how they were describing the paradox, and I was a little bit unhappy with some of the mixed bits and pieces with Kotchanski. I would probably give it a 7 or an 8.
Nice.
Because I really enjoyed it. It made me want to watch more. I found everyone entertaining and the cast really fun, and I loved the model shots and even the CGI. As I said, I'm all for shoddy CGI as long as I understand what it's trying to do. So yeah, I really enjoyed it, and it made me want to know more about the series. So yeah, it has to score high. So yeah, so I think I'll give it a 7 just because the three problems I did have were kind of like moments. So, the laughter track over the forced kiss and the seemingly kind of very masculine gaze on Kotchanski in terms of writing was a bit iffy. And the weird paradox moment where I didn't understand what the hell they meant. Other than that, really enjoyed the episode.
Well, yeah, 7 out of 10 for your first go-around is pretty good if you ask me. Phil, what about you?
I'm going to give it 7 out of 10 as well. It's a solid episode, I think. It was a good attempt at introducing a new regular character. I did miss Rimmer, though. Although we got to see him. Actually, that's a good positive, that even though he'd left, it was just nice to have this reminder of him. There's just this one little scene. I think that came about, if I'm remembering correctly, because they'd actually originally contracted him for 4 episodes in the series. And then they decided to get him to leave a bit earlier so that they could have more episodes with Kotchanski in and give more space to develop her character. So they kind of had him that they could use him. So they decided to a little bit extra. So that was good. There was some of I enjoyed Kotchanski. I'm looking forward to seeing her some more, and reminding myself how she develops, because it's been a while since I've seen this series. But I think there's definitely I'm hoping she does more of the pushing back against the rest of the crew that she did a little bit in this episode, but maybe not enough. I'm not sure. But yeah, that's overall a good episode.
Sound. Well, I'm going to make this a hat trick. Give it 7 out of 10 as well. Just, like solid enough that the comedy moments that worked really did work, as we've mentioned. The more like quieter stuff, like that scene Kotchanski and Lister had before she departs, was one of the better, I think, quieter moments Red Dwarf has had. Some good effects work as well. Just, some iffy bits here and there that we've talked about in terms of like how Kotchanski's been portrayed or written, or some like odd comments in the episode as well. Yeah, and similar to you, Phil, I just hope as we go on, she isn't, to put it bluntly, she's not just there for like eye candy, because that would be a great shame if that. I'd like to think it's not. I'd like to think the writers are clever enough that they've brought her back for more than, for a proper purpose. But yeah, I'd say this one's a 7. There's bits of it I'd remember, but I probably wouldn't remember like the whole episode, if that makes sense. I could point to bits like Crichton's meltdown probably being the key one. But yeah, 7s all round. Look at that hat trick. We like it. We like it. Well, that's the episode, and obviously next time we'll be talking about episode 4. But before we go, Sophie, first and foremost, thank you for joining us. You've been a fabulous guest reviewer with us. Where can the folks out there listening find you and your work?
So you can find me mostly on Twitter. It's probably the safest place to send you to. All my other bits are there. So it's Soph Iles Tweets. So SOPHILES tweets on Twitter, and you can find any of my doodles or any news about my writing or anything about that at all, or just me talking about things I'm watching, like Squid Game or Downton Abbey or whatever. Actually, merging those two things together sounds like a really good story as it is. But like whatever I be watching, whatever I'm doing, you'll be able to find it all on Twitter, and you can come poke me there, and maybe I'll get round to watching more Red Dwarf. And so yeah,
there you go. That's exciting. Oh, we got another one, Phil. Doing free promotion for him here. Phil, what about you? Where can the listeners find you?
Well, either on my YouTube channel, which you may be listening to this on, but if you're not, it's just my name, Philip Hawkins. Pictures like me in front of some TARDIS roundels. So easy to find, despite the fact there are other Philip Hawkinses on YouTube. Hawkeye, yes. Multiple Philip Hawkeye. But I am the one in front of it. And basically, if you go on it, I talk about Doctor Who a lot. I talk about the MCU. Obviously, this podcast goes up there. Basically, it's any geeky pop culture that I enjoy. I'll talk about on there. And on Twitter, you can find me. It's IUDEX_Phil. Phil with one L.
There you go. And just our podcast, this podcast does have its own Twitter account, which is @AllDeadDavePod. You can go and give us a follow there for updates on the show, announcements of guest reviewers, the occasional Red Dwarf meme and post as well. So go and give us a follow. And if you want to check out any of my stuff, just Adam Martyn with a Y, not with an I, on YouTube, and also on Twitter, Adam Martyn AMTV for daily ramblings and such like. So yeah, that's us. Well, that's another episode done. And just once again, Sophie, thank you so much for joining us. You've been brilliant.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it. Thank you for having me.
No problem. And as usual, listeners, me and Phil will catch you next time. See you later.
Bye-bye.